Hello, class. My name is Daniel.
And I'm Gary.
We'll be presenting the papers for week 10.
All right, so my paper is problem solving males become more attractive to female budgerigars. So let's go over some important terms. Sexual selection. Sexual selection is a type of natural selection arising through preference by one sex for certain characteristics in individuals of the other sex. So the one being sexually selected will more than likely have greater reproductive success. Cognition, the other term, is the acquisition, storage, and retrieval of information for decision-making. All right, for the introduction, let's see. Previous studies have only inferred that males with better cognitive abilities are selected. But in this research paper, they demonstrate this correlation a bit more clearly by testing if female mate choice is affected by direct observations of differences in cognitive abilities in males. The species in question is the female budgerigar, and it selects mates depending on their cognitive ability to forage for food. The researchers saw this pattern and wanted to test if the initially less preferred males that the females don't select could become preferred after being taught how to solve food foraging puzzles. The females then reobserve the males, and if they do change their mate preference, this would prove that the observation of these cognitive skills in males is the thing that's determining whether the female selects its mate or not. Next slide. So females sexually select for this cognitive ability to find food because while they're brooding and taking care of their chicks, they require males that are capable of foraging food and solving complex foraging tasks. Next slide, please. All right, let's go over some of the central question and the hypotheses. The main question is, does observing the cognitive skills of an individual make it more attractive as a mate? And the researchers put out this hypothesis that direct observations of problem-solving skills do indeed increase male attractiveness, and this could contribute to the evolution of these cognitive abilities. And when I say evolution, you think of Darwin, and this supports Darwin's proposition about the effects of sexual selection on the evolution of cognitive traits. Sexual selection is basically pushing cognitive traits to evolve within these birds, and these birds see problem solving as attractive, hence the sexual selection. Next slide. So there are two experiments, and between the two experiments, in both experiments, there are two preference tests that take place. Experiment one experiment one has no control group, and experiment one has a control group, experiment two has no control group. Experiment one exposes one female to two males, and there are 17 pairs of males tested with 17 females. 18 of those males are part of the problem-solving group, and 16 of those males are part of the control group. The focus on experiment one is on sexual preference. The focus on experiment two is on social preference because there's one female and two other females. There's one focal and two other females. And there's the reason it's like this is because we want to see if the increased preference shown for the problem-solving individuals reflects an increased social rather than sexual preference. Hence why we're using two females instead of two males for experiment two. Next slide. So the control groups in experiment one are made to control the effect of observing and eating male on the female's mate preference. In both experiments, the control group had a female select between a previously preferred mate who had no food or a less preferred mate who had access to free puzzle-less food. So they don't have to solve for the food, they're just given it. And why do we do this control group? We want to make sure the bird doesn't switch up from its initially preferred mate just for seeing the less preferred eat free food rather than solve cognitively for it. Next slide. So let me explain the method of experiment one. There's preference test one. In this test, females in both problem solving and the control group are tested with a pair of males in a two-choice cage. And in each cage, there's a preference zone. The female must fly to either side to prefer one of the mates. And the female during this first preference phase chooses its preferred male, and the less preferred male is then noted. The preferred male was given more time and attention than the less preferred male for both the control and the non-control groups, and the preferred males were given the same amount of time and attention in each group. Now for preference test two, after the females make their selections, the previously less preferred budgerigar male is then trained to solve Petri dish and three-step box puzzles to get food, whereas the preferred isn't taught this these puzzles. Females now reselect the less preferred males who can solve the puzzle over the preferred males. And in control group in preference test 2, the preferred male still gets selected. And this occurs because the less preferred male isn't necessarily attracting the female by just eating free food. It isn't showing any cognitive traits of solving, so the bird isn't interested in switching mates. Next slide. So experiment 2 is identical to experiment 1. They just use 2 females instead of 2 males. In both preference tests 1 and 2 of experiment 2, the focal female still spends more time with the original preferred male, regardless of the ability of the preferred female, regardless of the ability of the less preferred female to solve the puzzle. Yeah, even though they taught this preferred female how to get food, and the preferred can no longer solve this, they don't switch. This part of the experiment proves that the preference for skilled individuals in experiment 1 is linked to male demonstrators, hence the sexual component rather than social. And we know that birds aren't selecting males over a social component, and this is why they switch to less preferred males after it is trained in experiment 1. All right, so for the results, in experiment 1, as we can see here in the problem solving group, females switch from giving more time to the preferred mate to the less preferred mate after the less preferred mate is trained to solve the puzzles between the 2 preference tests. The control groups show no changes, and the previously preferred mate, the male, is given more time than the less preferred male in both cases. In experiment 2, both focal females choose the preferred female, regardless of the ability of the less preferred female to solve a foraging puzzle in the second preference test, because of social selection rather than sexual. This proves sexual selection is occurring in experiment 1 over social selection. All right, next slide. So relevance to lecture, cognition, like I said before, in the terms, cognition is the acquisition, storage, and retrieval of information for decision making. And a lot of animals, actually all animals, have some basic elements of cognition, such as perception, memory, and learning. And different species have different complexities of cognition. And in lecture, interestingly enough, we talked about how avian species, birds, have condensed neurons in their brains. And compared to like bigger animals with bigger brains, they pack more neurons in smaller space. And cognition is selected for, obviously, as we look at the brains. Next slide. So for our discussion questions, I have 2 questions for you guys. And the first one is, since avian species must designate so much energy into their cognitive traits as it is sexually selected, this must come with advantages and disadvantages to their other abilities and systems. What are some that you can think of? I'll let you guys answer that. And the second question is, Darwin proposed that mate choice contributes to the evolution of cognitive abilities. What are some other selection factors aside from sexual selection that we've learned about that push birds or other species to select for cognitive traits? For this one, think about natural selection. All right, Daniel, it's your turn.
Hello, my name is Daniel, and I'll be presenting the second paper, which is strong convergent male mate choice along 2 preference axes in field populations of black widow spiders by MacLeod et al. Some key words are chemical cues and pheromones, which are biochemicals that are released by living organisms to influence the behavior of mates, prey, and other living organisms in general. Male mate choice is a demonstrated preference by males for a certain type of conspecific for intraspecific reproduction. Lactrodectus hesperus is the species of black widows that shows male mate choice and is the subject of this paper. Sexual selection refers to the selection of certain characteristics over other traits due to their high reproductive value. And finally, cost of choice refers to how alternative choices are lost when one choice is made. Here's the introduction to this paper. Among black widow spiders, males have to make a choice on which mates to go after, since securing mates and successfully reproducing are difficult tasks that require high energy and time investments. Furthermore, female reproductive fitness is variable, with some giving healthier offspring than others. Therefore, males have to maximize their own reproductive fitness by finding mates that are well suited for reproduction. 2 critical factors that have been identified in assessing female reproductive fitness are fecundity and sperm composition risk. Fecundity refers to the fertility or the health of the female. Are they well fed or are they malnourished? Sperm competition risk refers to the mating status of the female. Have they mated before or are they a virgin? Here are some questions and hypotheses for this paper. What are the consequences of male mate choice on mating frequency with females in nature? Theoretically, it is expected that males will go after females with the highest reproductive fitness. In nature, however, intersexual competition against the other males for mates may cause some less competitive males to go for less fit females. Another question would be, how might male mate choice in nature impact female sexual selection? The hypothesis to this would be, male mate choice may lead to sexual selection for traits that indicate higher fertility, such as greater size. Here are the materials and methods for this paper. The experimental design was as follows. Researchers designed 19 replicates with 4 female spiders in each replicate, 2 of which were fed and 2 were unfed. Then they allowed 1 spider in each of the replicates to mate with an introduced male. In experiment 1, also known as the enclosure study, which has low cost of choice, researchers designed an isolated 3 by 3 meter square area enclosure and placed 4 female spiders at opposite corners of the enclosure and allowed them to build their webs. Once the female spiders were situated, researchers introduced the 2 male spiders into the enclosure at a time and allowed the male spiders to choose mates. Then researchers noted the male mate choice each time. Males were introduced into each of the enclosures many times. In experiment 2, which is also known as which involved free-ranging males and has a higher cost of choice and more closely matches nature, researchers placed 4 female spiders in an open field rather than an enclosure at different corners of a 3 by 3 meter square area. Then they applied insect glue to the base of the female webs to trap any visiting invertebrates. At the end of the testing period, they counted the total amount of black widow male mates that visited each of the sites. Here are the results and figures for this paper. In these charts, V indicates virgin, M indicates mated, F indicates fed, and U indicates unfed. As we can see, among enclosure males and free-ranging males, virgin and fed females attracted the most male mates. Here's the relevance of this paper to the lecture. As we can see, black widows use pheromones and behavior. Female black widows release chemical cues from their webs that indicates their fecundity and sexual status. These chemical cues influence male behavior and whether neighboring males pursue the female. Intrasexual selection is the competition within the same sex. Male black widow spiders must compete with other male black widow spiders to secure limited mates. Intersexual selection refers to the competition or selection across different sexes. Male black widow spiders demonstrate a clear preference for females with higher fecundity. This may drive sexual selection for larger female black widows. Here are some discussion questions that I came up with for this paper. Besides fecundity and sperm competition risk, what other factors may influence the desirability of female spiders in the eyes of male spiders when they look for mates? Another question would be, in this study, male black widow spiders demonstrated a male mate choice since they were the selective ones in the reproductive process. If there was instead female mate choice, where females select for mates, what traits in males do you think female black widow spiders would select for? How would you expect female mate choice to influence sexual selection pressure on males? Thank you for paying attention.
Thank you, guys.